Hi there, and welcome to Steps Together, the Steps for Development podcast, where we come together to grow our own skills so that we can help the children in our lives to thrive and succeed. I'm your host, Deb Johnson, and I'm so glad you're here. Today, I want to talk about my strength-based approach. I want to tell you what it is, why it matters, and then give you some real-life examples of just how effective this approach can be. Not only in helping children to grow their own skills, but to strengthen relationships between children and adults and to empower adults with the skills they need and the tools for success. So, what is a strength-based approach? It simply means that we start with an individual's strengths and we build from there, instead of focusing on fixing the deficits or the impairments or just focusing on all the things that are wrong, right? Start strong, not with what's wrong. That's the essence of it. It's not that we ignore the challenges. We absolutely look at the challenges. We identify what are the skills that are lagging and where does the individual need to maybe build those skills. But it's the idea that we use the strengths as the springboard for that growth. Now, as an OT, I'm trained to assess an individual's skills, but I'm also trained to look at the big picture. So when I'm looking at an individual, I'm not only looking for their skills and abilities, as well as their passions and interests, their obsessions, the things that really drive and motivate them, right? Their values, their belief system. I'm also looking at multiple levels of the environment and the task itself or the activity. So there's obviously the physical environment, right? And there may be some strengths and challenges with that, but there's also the family as an environment or other settings like the school setting or being out in the community at a daycare center or whatever that might, a park program, something like that. And then there is also the cultural environment. So this is our social and cultural norms, which might be rooted in religious beliefs, might be rooted just in individual belief systems related to social expectations, right? What is considered normal or typical behavior. So we look at all those kinds of environments. And then we also look at the task itself. Like, does the task have some strengths? Is it really necessary? Is it really required? Or is it sort of a fluff task, right? A fluff activity? What's the relevance of it? Now, a strength-based model is very different than a medical model. A medical model is very deficit-driven. We go to the doctor, we describe all of our symptoms, the doctor makes a list of our symptoms and then works backwards to find a diagnosis. So that's a deficit model, and it focuses on fixing what's wrong, right? With a strength-based model, we start with what's strong, and then we build from there, right? It's about meeting children where they are, and then helping them to grow the skills that they need in order to improve their participation. And it's very important to understand that this is consistent with a developmental approach, right? Development requires doing what you're good at and then building from there. That's the essence of development. So again, instead of focusing on what's wrong, we're going to focus on what's strong. Now, this approach does three very important things that affect positive outcomes. First and foremost, it builds relationships. It grows our empathy and compassion for the kids that we're working with or raising. It shifts our thinking from a negative view of the child to a more positive and supportive view that allows us to solve the problems instead of getting stuck in complaining and identifying all the problems that the child has, right? We shift our thinking from listing the problems to recognizing and embracing their strengths. which opens the door for solving the problem by embracing those strengths, meeting them where they're at, and helping them build from there, right? It shifts us from seeing the child in a negative light to recognizing just how awesome they are. At Steps for Kids Pediatric Therapy, our intake paperwork includes a section that asks the caregiver to list their child's strengths, right? And sometimes we get lists that include wonderful things like really smart, very curious, has a big heart, is kind, has a great sense of humor, loves their baby sister, loves animals, loves monster trucks, right? Whatever it is. Occasionally, that section, name your child, list your child's strengths, is blank. And that tells me as an OT and a coach that this parent is really struggling. This parent is really overwhelmed and focused on that list of struggles and challenges. They're focused on all the things their child cannot do. And they're focused on how big those things impact their lives. And I get it. It's a typical place to be. I meet parents all the time that are in that really kind of ugly, dark spot. So, but this is where we come in, right? This is where I can help you to see your child's strengths and to build from there. So that positive shift is the number one thing that this strength-based approach does to help us become problem solvers. The second thing that it does is that it builds skills. Typical development occurs where we take the skills that we're good at and we engage in those things, right? And then we build from there by giving ourselves small challenges. In occupational therapy, we call this the just right challenge. It's a term that was coined by Jean Ayres, who developed the theory of sensory integration. And she talked a lot about the just right challenge being necessary in order for normal development to occur. So I like to use the example of a child learning to ride a bike. They start with their skills that are foundational to balance, right? That they have these foundational balance skills and they are competent at walking, climbing, going up and down stairs. They've built this balance and they have this underlying strength of good balance and coordination. And then we put them on a bike, maybe a two-wheel bike with training wheels. Well, that child has the confidence to navigate sitting on a bike that's a little wobbly because they've got the foundational skills. The just right challenge is that the training wheels are lifted up a little bit and the bike wobbles. So as they learn and develop that skill to balance on two wheels, their development spirals on up, and now we can take the training wheels off. But when you take the training wheels off, they only ride in a straight line. They go down the sidewalk or down the driveway, and when they get to the end, they stop the bike, they put their feet down, stop the bike, turn it around, right? They might even get off and turn it around, and then they ride back in a straight line. Because now the just right challenge is making a turn while staying on the bike and not letting it fall over. So they spiral up and they finally develop that skill. And now they can make big, wide, lazy turns. And then that slowly improves to where they can make a tight turn. And maybe now they can do figure eights on their bike. And then before you know it, they have spiraled up in their development so that they're testing being able to ride their bike with no hands. And that is the normal spiral of development. And therapeutically, that's what we're trying to facilitate within an OT session, the just right challenge. And that requires knowing where their skills are. Where are their strengths? What can they do well? Meet them there at that level, and then bring them up, pull them along, giving them the just right challenge so that they can build their skills. The third thing that it does is to build confidence and mastery. When a child has experienced a successful spiral of development, they've had the just right challenge, they felt success at achieving a new skill. Now they're building confidence and a sense of competence, a sense of agency, a sense of mastery within their own daily activities. Children who are repeatedly asked to practice something they are not good at will eventually avoid that activity. You're probably going to get power struggles, arguments. Parents always say they don't cooperate, they're non-compliant, they're oppositional, all these negative terms. And all that child is doing is trying to preserve their own sense of agency and competency, and their sense of mastery and confidence that they can do things. So, for example, if a child is struggling with handwriting and they lack some foundational skills, like maybe they have visual problems or attention problems or fine motor problems with their hands and their fingers and isolated movement, right? These foundational tasks, these foundational skills, rather. And the task of handwriting, which is so complex for us as human beings, is difficult. Well, being forced to practice handwriting is not going to be successful because that's not the just right challenge. So asking them repeatedly or demanding and putting that expectation on them that they create a written essay when they don't have those foundational skills is only going to build a sense of failure, a sense of resentment, a desire to completely avoid that activity at all costs. They have no motivation, no desire. Think about yourself. If in a job you were told that you had to spend an hour every day working on a task that you did not have the skills to do, right? Let's just say hypothetically, you are given the task of creating multiple Excel spreadsheets and you do not know diddly squat about Excel spreadsheets and you don't have the computer tech skills to even know where to start. You would be extremely frustrated. And if your boss repeatedly asked you to do those things, you'd probably find a new job. So think of that as sort of an analogy with what some of our kids are going through when they are repeatedly asked to do things that are just too challenging for them because they lack the foundational skills. And if we identify those foundational strengths and we start there and then build those skills, now we see magic happen because we've met them where they're at. We've facilitated a normal spiral of development. And now the child is developing this sense of agency and competency, self-confidence, and a sense of, yes, I can do this. And that fuels the motivation to do more, the normal spiral of development. All right, so let me give you some examples of how a strength-based model plays out in real life. I'm going to share 3 different examples with you. And all these examples are children whose challenge in this situation was difficulty making transitions. I'm going to use that same task and give you 3 different examples with 3 very different children, because I want you to see how this problem-solving approach works to address individual differences. That's really, really important. So many times, people try to use the same approach across many different children. Well, using this fidget worked with Susie, so it should work with Joey. No, not necessarily. We need to recognize that Susie and Joey are 2 very unique, different people. And the fidget that worked with Susie, Joey might not care at all about that. So that's really very, very important that we recognize the individual differences and how this approach lends itself to being so very individualized. And it's part of its strength and the success behind it. All right, so first example, I'm going to call my friend Billy. And by the way, all of these examples are real life examples. I'm just changing names for privacy. So Billy was an extremely gifted little boy. He was about 4 and very, very gifted intellectually, extremely curious, very self-aware from the sense of like asking deep questions and things like that. Did have diagnoses, autism and ADHD, and had a lot of challenges that came with those diagnoses. One of Billy's strengths, though, was his capacity for pretend play. And his obsession for pretend play was construction. Billy absolutely loved to pretend to build things, and he loved to set it up that he was essentially the foreman and I was the worker. And so, I had to follow his directions. There was quite a bit of strong will. And, from a challenge, rigidity, right? There was a little bit of rigidity there. He didn't like to shift that. But I could see that if I could harness his pretend play and his love of construction, that we might be able to facilitate some growth in terms of transitions, right? Transitions require a lot of flexibility. They require a lot of attention shifting and many other skills that are foundational to being able to transition. So here's what I did for Billy in the clinic. I created a scenario where the construction pretend play morphed right into our transition out of the clinic space. So he was still the foreman and I was still the worker, but the job was to clean up the work site because every job has to come to an end. All the workers have to go home eventually, right? And before you leave the job site, you have to meet safety requirements. And so I put all these things in place, right? Playing on the strength of the pretend play, building on his creativity with the construction theme or play scheme, as I call it, and his strength that he was very much a rule follower. He liked to know that things were just the rule. So, and he certainly understood the rules of a construction site. I mean, that was, again, he was so knowledgeable about that. And it worked, right? When we structured transitions that way, he went with the play scheme and he just moved right on out of the sessions. Did it work 100% of the time? No. And we have to be prepared for that. But did it work over time to develop his skills and allow us to then build from there? Yes, it absolutely did. It even moved into the home setting where the parent could use those play schemes for setting rules. And in the home environment, we established that the parents were the foreman and he was the worker. So we were able to address some of that flexibility, and we were able to help him understand some of the rules at home and be much more cooperative with a lot of different activities at home by pulling that same play scheme and using those strengths of his pretend play and his love of construction. All right, example number 2 is a little girl named Cassie. And Cassie, again, diagnosed on the spectrum, and many, many challenges, one of which was motor planning. And motor planning really impacts a child's ability to engage socially. It can impact their abilities to create novel movement sequences and to follow directions. So Cassie had a lot of difficulty following directions to transition out of the clinic, and this was seen at home and in the community as well. All transitions were very, very difficult, and this is common for children who have motor planning problems. The reason it's common is because motor planning has to do with understanding an idea for what needs to be done, right? Creating it themselves or getting the idea from other people, and then being able to plan and organize the steps required and then executing the steps. So it's a very complex process, motor planning. So Cassie had a lot of difficulty with motor planning and a lot of difficulty with transitions. Cassie's strength, however, was that she was noticing her peers and she was motivated independently to imitate peers. So that's a huge, huge developmental step. And we used that to help Cassie learn how to make transitions out of the clinic. So whenever we had peers that were present, we would use them. But if the peers weren't there, we would just use myself and other therapists or the parents as the models for this child. So we would provide a model for, oh, it's time to clean up. It's time to put on our shoes. It's time to go to the waiting room. And because Cassie's strength was imitating others, this worked far more effectively than giving her verbal directions or even using picture schedules. Those just were not working. But if we gave her the demonstration, the model, and we supported her ability to imitate others, she was successful. Again, not 100% of the time, but most of the time. And it led to development of those skills to transition over time. So then we could continue to facilitate Cassie's spiral of development. All right, the last example I'm going to give you is a little guy I'll call Ryan. Ryan was very strong-willed, very strong-willed, a smart guy, very, very verbal, really very clever, very smart. And one of the things that really touched my heart was how his mom described all kinds of challenges and power struggles with him, but under the strengths she listed has a heart as just a heart of gold, I think is what she said, right? A heart of gold. So very empathic and compassionate when the attention and engagement and connection was there. He was diagnosed with ADHD. And that was his only medical diagnosis, I think. So Ryan is displaying strengths in his strong will and his intellect and his heart of gold. Those are all his strengths. So that's what we pulled from in order to help him with transitioning. He was one who had to always do one more thing. One more thing. I've got one more thing. I just need to do one more thing. I just need to finish this. Wait, I just need to talk to this person. Wait, I just need to do this. That's what transitions looked like for Ryan. You might have a kid like that. And so what we did was we put him in charge. We put him in charge of the transition. He set the timer. He decided what things were going to be done before we said goodbye. He made a checklist with some help from myself where we would draw some pictures and so that he knew what was coming. And then because of his attention, one of the things that worked, a strategy that worked to compensate for challenges with attention and auditory processing was getting close to him, right? I call it proximity of the speaker. Ryan was a child that did not do well with instructions that were given from across the room. But if you got right next to him and you were eye level and you didn't demand eye contact, he processed auditory information much more efficiently. And we discovered that getting close, lowering our voice volume, getting his attention, and telling him that we had a problem, right? We had a problem. The time was done and we needed to leave. He would say, oh, okay, because he does have a heart of gold and he just needed support to attend to what was expected. And he needed redirection back to the list he had made, which was his design for how we were going to transition out. And we'd go back to, did we do all the things on your list? And he'd say, oh, yeah, we did. And I'd say, okay, well, this was your plan. And he'd say, yeah, it was. Now, again, did this work by putting him in charge, by giving him more control over how the session played out and what the end of the session looked like? Yeah, it worked, not 100% of the time. And that's really important to understand across the board. The strategies that we're using are not going to work 100% of the time. And the reason is because all of us as human beings are dynamic and we're always changing. And some days are great days and some days are not so great. And some days the physical environment is very supportive and other days it's not. This is why learning how to problem solve and choose the strategies, choose the tools is so very crucial for success. It's not just having a toolkit. Having that toolkit does not help you if you do not know when and how to implement those tools. So I hope this helps you to understand exactly what a strength-based model is and just how effective this approach can be to finding the solutions that really work, right? Knowing how to respond, empowering you as the adult, not just with a tool, but with the instruction manual for how to use that tool. So thanks for joining me today. Please share with me any comments or feedback that you have regarding today's episode. I'd love to hear from you. If you like what you're hearing here, please share this podcast. Follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can find me by searching for Steps for Development. And on Facebook, it's Steps for Development, Education and Consulting. You can sign up for my newsletter. There's links on my social media pages. You can even grab a PDF of 10 reasons why your child's behavior isn't bad behavior when you sign up for the newsletter. I think it's a great resource for you to share with others to really start advocating for your child and all children by educating adults about what's really driving that behavior that they're so baffled by and very often labeling as bad. There's a lot more to come from Steps for Development. I'm going to be launching a self-paced course on self-regulation, and coming soon is a new community, a community where we can come together to problem solve for your own individual challenges, support each other in our growth. There's going to be a lot more content, live coaching calls inside that community. And I would love to have you be a founding member. So if you're interested, shoot me a DM, make a comment anywhere on social media, or email me directly. My email is Deborah, D-E-B-R-A, at stepsfordevelopment.com. Let me know you want in as a founding member for this community, and I'll get you all the details. So stick around, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.